is not 100% line by line, word for word, detailed agreement in every Masoretic manuscript. There are variations. So the vast majority of Masoretic manuscripts to Psalm 22 read, Ka'ari, like a lion, my hands and feet. But there's no verb there. Like a lion, my hands and feet. Dogs have surrounded me. An band of evil men has encircled me. Like a lion, my hands and my feet. So you have to supply a verb there. Like a lion, my hands and my feet. Reads kind of interestingly, because you'd expect a verb there. Like a lion, my hands and my feet. So I ask a simple question. Like a lion licking my hands and feet? Like a lion kissing my hands and feet? Or perhaps like Rashi says, like a lion gnawing my hands and feet? Yeah, if the imagery, and it's poetic imagery, if the imagery is I'm surrounded by dogs, I'm surrounded by lions, they're at my hands and feet, they're chewing, they're chomping, it's a brutal imagery that could well point to crucifixion. In other words, when you read this ultimately and say, David was not talking about crucifixion because crucifixion did not exist in his day. Crucifixion was something that the Persians came up with centuries later, and then the Greeks learned it from the Persians, and the Romans learned it from the Greeks, and then it was ultimately outlawed by the Romans because of its barbarity. So crucifixion did not exist in that day. And David was not specifically describing crucifixion. He's speaking of acute suffering in these poetic terms, which amazingly, when Messiah actually comes, in graphic, literal terms, this is what happened. So I would have no problem whatsoever if all of our translations said like a lion and then supplied the word. They're mauling, gnawing, biting at my hands and feet. Either way, it's a brutal picture, and it certainly works well as a description of crucifixion. But where did they get pierced from? Well, that's how the Septuagint translated it, pierced. Remember, Jewish translation before the time of Jesus. Contrary to what Rabbi Singer mentioned, Jewish translation prior to the time of Yeshua. They translated pierced. Not only so, there are Masoretic manuscripts passed on by rabbinic Jews that read ka'aru versus ka'ari. Ka'aru meaning to bore through. Can mean to dig out, to bore through. So there are Masoretic manuscripts that read ka'aru, not ka'ari. Ka'ari like a lion, ka'aru, they bore out, they dug out, hence the meaning pierced. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Hebrew copy of the Psalms from before the time of Yeshua, the manuscript reads ka'aru. They dug out, they bore out my hands and feet, not ka'ari, like a lion. Now the difference is the tiniest difference between a vav and a yud in Hebrew. It's just one line and a little bit longer line. One anti-missionary disputed the Dead Sea Scroll reading and said, no, I don't think that's a vav. I don't think it's ka'aru. They bore out, they dug out, they pierced. I don't think it's that. I think it's ka'ari, like a lion. I was just in a lecture with one of the top Dead Sea Scroll scholars in the world. In fact, a man who's worked with these very manuscripts in the originals, has access to the scrolls, Dr. Peter Flint. And he just gave the details of this reading. It is ka'aru. So listen to me. The oldest Hebrew manuscript we have reads ka'aru. The oldest Jewish translation we have into Greek reads they pierced. And some medieval Jewish manuscripts even say ka'aru. They dug out, bore out, pierced. So this is not a Christian invention. It's fine with me if it says like a lion, and plus it's not quoted in the New Testament anyway. The imagery is just the same, just as powerful. But this is not a Christian invention. Don't let anybody tell you that there is some diabolical plot to mistranslate the Hebrew Bible so as to mislead innocent, gullible, naive Jews. That is nonsense. These are fine scholars working with the evidence that they have, coming to the best conclusions they can come to. Every translation, Jewish, Christian, any translation, is an interpretation and a commentary at the same time, because you constantly have debatable words, you constantly have difficult phrases, and it's natural that Jewish translations will come to Jewish conclusions and Christian translations, Christian conclusions, but you'd be amazed to see when you deal with scholars of the language how much harmony there is on so many of the verses and so much of the understanding. And this particular verse here is not a Christian issue. It's a Jewish issue because we're just dealing with Jewish manuscript evidence and ancient Jewish translations. End of subject. This is not a stunning mistranslation. This is not, they're the same Christians. These Messianic Jews, like Matthew, they would invent verses. Then they'd quote parts of verses with the hope that you wouldn't look up the whole verse. These are the same ones who prey on the elderly. Same ones who translate these Bibles. No, in point of fact, this is, I wish we could diffuse the emotion and just read the words and look at the manuscript evidence and get beyond that, because this is just a Jewish translation issue, nothing more, nothing less. Let's keep going. A couple more verses we'll look at here. Isaiah 61, 1 and 2 is quoted in Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, Yeshua takes the scroll, opens it to this passage, Isaiah 61. Some believe that this was the portion of the prophets that was to be read that day in the synagogue, hence he picked it up and read it. Others believe that the readings were not fixed in that day, so he read this with intentionality. Either way, it was the moment for him to read it. It was the right time. It was accurate. So he takes the scroll of the prophet. This is in the synagogue service. He finds the place where it's written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then he stops there. The verse then goes on with day of vengeance of our God, but he stops there because his announcement was one of good news. And then he says, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." This word that the prophet originally spoke has its ultimate application in me. The Spirit of the Lord's on me. Ruach Adonai Elohim alayat mashach Adonai oti levaser navi. These words are now fulfilled in me. Well, what's the issue here? Well, let's go back, look at Isaiah 61, and let's see what we have here. Spirit of the Lord's on me, Spirit of the Lord's on me. Because the Lord's anointed me, the Lord's anointed me. Preach good news to the poor, preach good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up brokenhearted, okay. Skips that part. To proclaim freedom for the captives, got that. Recovery of sight for the blind, okay. Release from darkness for the prisoners, that could be similar. Release the oppressed. Proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So Luke's citing most of the verses here, but he's got an extra little phrase, to release the oppressed, which is not actually found there, but is found actually in Isaiah 58 about the true observance of Sabbath, that you're to loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, set